bienvenido a mi canal. Yo me llamo Sigfredo. Soy una abogada afro-latina licenciada y practicando en las leyes criminales, pero como todos ustedes me fascina cuando estamos hablando de casos de crímenes reales. En este video vamos a hablar del caso de Dan Markel. Si quieren más video en español, nada más dime allá abajo. Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Desiree. I'm a licensed and practicing Afro-Latina criminal attorney who, much like the rest of you, has a severe fascination with true crime cases. Listen, the case we're going to cover today is a case of deception, disastrous divorces, horrible child custody disputes, and a deadly dentistry practice. And that is the case of the Adelson family. But, as I always like to do, before we talk about the Adelsons, who they are, what some of them have done, and what some of them are alleged to have done, let's talk a little bit more about the victim and alleged victim of their crime, and that is Dan Markel. Daniel Eric Markel was born on October 9th, 1972 in Montreal, Canada. Daniel's parents, Ruth and Phil Markel, raised Dan and his sister Shelley in a religious Jewish household. Dan, affectionately known by his friends and family as Danny, was brilliant. He graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University with his bachelor's in politics and philosophy. Dan left Harvard University to earn his master's in political theory from Emmanuel College in Cambridge. Dan then returned to Harvard Law School, where he received his Juris Doctor in 2001. After graduating from law school, Dan was a judicial clerk for the Honorable Judge Michael Daley Hawkins in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Dan then went on to practice white-collar defense as an associate at Kellogg, Huber, Hanson, Todd, Evans, and Figel in Washington, D.C. Then in 2005, Dan's career took him back to Tallahassee, Florida, where he became a professor at Florida State University College of Law. In addition to being a brilliant legal mind, Dan was a published author. He co-authored a book entitled Privilege or Punish: Criminal Justice and the Challenge of Family Ties in 2009. This book explored the intersection between crime, punishment, and the family. Dan also wrote multiple law reviews, which argued for the abolition of the death penalty and critiqued the use of shaming as punishment, among other things. So Dan is a highly respected and sought-after law professor. What happened? On July 18th of 2014, shortly before 11 a.m., Dan was doing his normal morning routine. He had just dropped his sons off at preschool and was headed towards the gym. When Dan was done with the gym, he returned home, but unbeknownst to him, two hired hitmen who had driven from Miami all the way to Tallahassee were pulling in his driveway behind him. One of Dan's neighbors heard gunshots and saw a lightly colored Toyota Prius fleeing the scene shortly thereafter. After waiting a moment, Dan's neighbor went over to see if everything was all right. But the scene that he was about to see was something that no one would have anticipated. When he walked over, he saw the driver's side window of Dan's vehicle completely shattered. Dan was still inside the vehicle, slumped over the steering wheel with multiple gunshot wounds to his head. The neighbor immediately called 911.
911, what's the address of your emergency case then? Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
We heard and looked in, the garage door was up, and I thought the gentleman was backing out, and I went back to my house, but he never backed out, and I came back over, and his driver's side window is shattered, and he's battered and can't answer. He's inside. I don't know if somebody tried to shoot him or if he shot himself or what. I don't know. He didn't send an ambulance in a hurry. An EMT. He's still alive. He's moving.
Although Dan was still clinging to life at that point, he was in a lot of pain. He was rushed to the hospital, where he still suffered for multiple hours before officially being pronounced dead. But who would do this to Danny Markel? From 2014 up until 2022, law enforcement continued their tireless efforts to figure out what happened. In their investigation, they had learned that Dan Markel had been legally divorced in 2013, 1 year prior to his murder. Although legally divorced, law enforcement learned that Dan and his ex-wife, Wendi Adelson, were still embroiled in a very nasty and contentious child custody dispute. Dan met Wendi in 2004 on a website called JDate. For those of you that don't know, JDate is a website that advertises itself as the place where Jewish singles meet. Dan wanted to meet someone who was similar to him in order to raise a family. In 2004, he came across Wendi's profile. Wendi and her mother, Donna, were also on a mission on the website. They scrolled through it together to find potential Jewish suitors because Wendi also wanted to get married. In 2006, 2 years after meeting on the website, the pair got married. In 2009, they had their first son, and in 2010, they welcomed a second. Although Wendi and Danny were both Jewish, they kind of didn't practice all of the same teachings. According to Wendi, Danny was into a really strict kosher diet, and that was of less importance to her. And that is how Danny wanted to raise their kids, which often led to a lot of disputes. Wendi told Danny that she wanted a divorce in 2012. Danny did not want the divorce. He was very saddened by the news that his wife wanted to leave. But ultimately, she got her way and the divorce was finalized a year later in 2013. The divorce proceedings were anything but pleasant. In reviewing the pair's divorce filings, prosecutors found several motions between each side. Wendi had asked the court for permission to relocate her and her sons to Miami as she wanted to be closer to her family because that's where she was from. And by Wendi's family, I mean her brother Charlie Adelson, her mother Donna Adelson, and their father Harvey Adelson. Danny vehemently opposed this request because he was based out of Tallahassee. As I mentioned, he was a respected law professor at Florida State University. He had no reason to move to Miami, and he didn't want his sons to be further away from him. Ultimately, the court ruled in Dan's favor and did not allow Wendi to relocate to Miami with their sons. As you can kind of imagine, this infuriated Wendi. Wendi told her mother Donna about the court's ruling, and Wendi and Donna came up with alternate plans to kind of try to make things happen a different way. Donna even at one point suggested that they bribed Danny by giving him $1 million to allow the kids to relocate to Miami. Of that $1 million, Wendi was to pay a third, Donna was to pay a third, and Charlie, Wendi's brother, was to pay the final third. Shortly before his murder, Dan filed an additional motion with the court requesting the court limit Donna's parenting time because Donna was bad-mouthing him to his sons. Unfortunately, that motion remained pending when he was killed. As I said earlier, the Adelsons were an extremely tight-knit family. Wendi's father, Harvey, was a dentist, and her brother, Charlie, was a periodontist. They had their own dentistry practice entitled the Adelson Institute, and their mother, Donna, oversaw and managed the practice. The Adelson Institute would offer patients cash discounts as an incentive if they paid for their services in cash. There's absolutely no issue with carrying around large quantities of cash, but Charlie kept his cash in a very particular way. So Charlie kept his cash grouped in $100 bills, sorted by groups of $1,000, and stapled. Charlie was Donna's confidant, so whenever Wendi would call Donna to complain about her issues with Danny, Donna would then in turn call Charlie. Unlike his sister, Wendi, Charlie had no interest in settling down. He wasn't really the family man or creating his own type of family man, right? He had a bunch of different girlfriends in and out of his life. And he just, I don't know, it was like musical girlfriends or something, but he had a bunch of different girlfriends. One of those such girlfriends was Katherine Magbanua. Charlie met Katherine because Katherine was a patient of Charlie's dentistry practice. Katherine had 2 kids of her own with her ex-boyfriend, Sigfredo Tuto Garcia. Their relationship was pretty tumultuous, and it was on and off the entire time. Sigfredo had a really good friend named Luis Rivera, and Luis's nickname was Tato. So Tato and Tuto, they've known each other their entire lives, pretty much. They grew up together, they went to the same elementary school together, they were really, really close friends. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, people have good friends from a long period of time. The issue, at least from my perspective, is that both of the men were members of the Latin Kings, a very, very prolific, notable, and dangerous street gang. In order to figure out what happened to Danny, police retraced his steps on the morning of the murder. When they did that, they found surveillance footage of the Prius that the neighbor had seen flee from the scene. The footage also showed that the Prius was waiting for Danny for a full hour as he worked out before he started driving to his home. Some of you guys may already know this. I don't know how common it is, so I'm going to stop, take a minute, and explain this right here. So in addition to surveillance footage that you can get from businesses like restaurants, stores, stuff like that, there's also halo footage, which are street cameras that are set up throughout the city. I say this to say, some of you guys are probably thinking to yourselves, well, how are they able to see that the car was traveling through the streets of the city and that it was following? That's how. In addition to surveillance footage, officers checked bank records. And what they found was quite interesting. They noticed that Katherine, Sigfredo, and Luis all made some pretty big purchases right after the murder. Sigfredo and Luis bought motorcycles, cars, what they called different toys, while Katherine paid for a breast augmentation in cash. Officers also noticed that Katherine had more deposits in her bank account in the last few weeks after the murder than she did the entire year prior. But they're still thinking to themselves, why would these seemingly random people do this? So they thought to themselves, let's do a tower dump. So a tower dump is when officers get a list of different phone numbers that are associated with a specific tower, right? So when you have your cell phone and you're outside, the cell phone has to cling onto a tower in order to be active, in order to work for you. So officers looked through the list of numbers that they got to see if there was any sort of connections they could make. In that list of numbers of all the towers near the locations where Danny visited the morning of his death, they found a cell phone number belonging to no other than Sigfredo Garcia. They noticed that Sigfredo was in constant contact with another number, so they traced and found out that the second number belonged to Luis Rivera. But why? Why? The records also showed that Sigfredo and Luis both turned their phones off shortly before their murder and then re-turned the phones on or reactivated them right after, as they were headed towards Miami. After gathering all this information, police had more than enough probable cause to get a warrant. So they did. They got a warrant for what's called a wiretap. And a wiretap, I'm sure you guys have heard of before, but it's basically when officers listen into your phone calls because they suspect foul activity at play. In this case, officers did not receive authorization to do the wiretap until 2 years following the murder, so in 2016. What was interesting to officers was the fact that Charlie and Katherine were still in constant communication, despite the fact that they broke up in the fall of 2014. So here they are 2 years later, listening to The Wire, trying to figure out, why are they still talking to one another? They're broken up. So like I mentioned, it's 2 years following the murder, and police kind of need a reason to get all these people who have seemingly moved on with their lives to re-engage about Danny's case. So officers start a plan. They're going to do an investigation, and they call it the bump. So the bump is that officers or an undercover officer would walk up to Donna Adelson, quote, bump into her, and claim that they were there on behalf of Luis Rivera, and see if they can get any information regarding the murder. See, the interesting thing is that at this point, Lewis was already in custody on a completely unrelated charge. After the officers did this, they continued to listen into the phone calls because they wanted to see what would happen after the bump. You know, you would think a normal person or someone who's not involved in criminal activity or alleged criminal activity would say something to the effect of, well, gee, I had a really strange interaction today. Maybe even call the police, alert someone, fear for their lives. What is this person talking about? But no, Donna didn't do any of those things. Instead, she called her closest confidant, Charlie, and requested that they have an in-person meeting to talk about something that involved both of them. And one of Charlie's ex-girlfriends. She didn't say which ex-girlfriend. She didn't say what it involved for the both of them. But I mean, I guess Charlie already knew. Charlie then called Katherine, and the pair met in person. Officers went to the location the two were to meet in person and recorded the entirety of the interaction. Some notable parts of the conversation were that Charlie was telling Katherine that if the person who did the bump was an undercover officer, that's a good thing, because that means they don't have enough information to charge anyone. So, on May 26th of 2016, officers made their first arrest in this case, Sigfredo Garcia.
You are represented by counsel, sir?
Yes, sir. He does qualify for public defender, Your Honor.
And you already have retained an attorney to represent you, sir?
I did.
Where you've been charged with murder in the first degree. There is no bond on that offense.
After Sigfredo's arrest, the court ordered the probable cause affidavit for his arrest to be unsealed. I'll just take 1 minute to explain this to you guys right here. Whenever an officer submits for an arrest warrant, that arrest warrant is accompanied with a probable cause affidavit. In the affidavit, it will explain all the allegations that the officer believes points to this person as far as a suspect in this crime, right? So when the judge signs off on it, the judge is reading the officer's probable cause affidavit as to what the officer believes happened here and why it points to this defendant. When cases such as murders occur, the probable cause affidavit will typically be filed under seal so no one else has access to it. That's just typical practice. After the defendant is arrested, the court will typically unseal the warrant so that the defendant and their counsel has an idea of what the officers are alleging that has to do with this defendant. On June 17th of 2016, a grand jury indicted both Sigfredo and Luis of first-degree murder. Another little tidbit, in order for a grand jury indictment to be valid, the prosecutor must indict the individuals within a certain amount of time following their arrest, right? So in Florida, I checked with a friend who's a prosecutor out in Florida. This timeline is 30 days. So 30 days after the arrest, within 30 days after the arrest, the prosecutors must indict. So you guys remember how I said that Luis was already in custody for something unrelated prior to the indictment, and that's how the bump occurred, right? Okay, so Luis kind of proved to be a really big help to the prosecutors in this case. He was in custody on federal racketeering charges and was serving a sentence of 12 years. In exchange for his cooperation, prosecutors offered him a 19-year concurrent sentence.
How old are you, Mr. Rivera?
36.
Are you currently incarcerated?
Yes, ma'am.
And where are you currently incarcerated?
Right now I'm in the feds.
With the feds?
Federal prison.
Okay. And are you serving a sentence currently for both this case and an unrelated federal case?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did you plead to in this case that we're here about today?
19 years.
All right, but what charge did you plead to?
Second-degree murder.
All right, 19 years in prison?
Yes, ma'am.
And you're serving that concurrent with your federal sentence?
Yes, ma'am.
How long is the federal sentence?
12 and a half.
All right. And what did you have to do in exchange for your 19-year sentence in this case?
Cooperate.
Concurrent just means that instead of having the charges run consecutively, one after another, so 19 plus 12, that Luis would just be doing one sentence of 19 years. Luis proved to be a goldmine of information. He said that he and Sigfredo were hired by none other than Katherine Magbanua to commit the murder of Danny Markel. He explained that the motive behind the murder was because the lady wanted her kids back. Luis further explained that he didn't know the lady, he didn't know her name, he didn't know Danny Markel, had no business with Danny Markel, but instead they received a piece of paper with Danny's picture on it, so that's how they knew who they were to execute. Luis also explained that there was another attempt at Danny's life prior to the day that they actually executed him. Luis explained that he and Sigfredo drove from Miami to Tallahassee on an occasion prior, but they were unable to execute the hit.
And was which one of these guns, if either of them, ended up being the murder weapon in this case?
The one that I brought.
Right, the one that you purchased on the corner?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was before the first trip to Tallahassee?
That was the first trip.
All right, so what was the purpose of the first trip?
We came to scope them out.
Okay, were you intending to commit the murder on the first trip?
It was supposed to, but we couldn't find them.
Luis explained to law enforcement that on that occasion, Sigfredo had an accident with a gun that fired off into the floorboard of the vehicle, and there's a hole in the vehicle. Officers were able to corroborate absolutely everything that Luis said. Luis also stated that after they finally did execute Danny, the first call that was made by either of them was to Katherine Magbanua. Luis said that he heard Sigfredo on the phone talking to Katherine, and as Sigfredo was talking to Katherine, he heard Sigfredo tell Katherine that the job was already done. Katherine then stated that the pair were to get their cut of the money the next day. Luis explained that he was not satisfied with that because they already did the murder, they did what they were supposed to do, and they wanted their money in the same day. The amount of money that the three of them were going to split was $100,000. Luis also said something that you'll find very interesting. He said that when Katherine or Katie, because that's what she's known as, formally paid them the next day, it was in stacks of $100 bills grouped into $1,000 and stapled on the corners. On October 1st of 2016, 3 days prior to Luis's plea, officers arrested Katherine Magbanua. Katherine was offered immunity in exchange for her cooperation in this case. I want to stop right there. I'm not sure everyone is aware of this, but there are multiple types of immunities that a prosecutor can offer you, right? So there's full immunity, also known as transactional immunity, and there's use and derivative use immunity. I was curious as to what type of immunity she was offered here because they are not the same, right? Full/transactional immunity means you're in the clear. We're not going to prosecute you. You are in the clear. And use and derivative use immunity means when you come and testify for us, if we choose to prosecute you further in a different case, anything that you say to us as part of your testimony will not be used against you in any further prosecutions of you. That's what that means, right? Katherine was given full immunity, complete immunity, all the immunity, all of it. And she still turned that down.
Weren't you originally offered immunity for cooperation in this case?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
But you didn't take us up on that?
No, ma'am, I didn't.
Because you thought you could get off completely?
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
And now you're doing a life sentence?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Now, you were arrested and charged with the murder of Professor Markel on October 1, 2016, correct?
Yes, sir.
Almost immediately, the state talked to your lawyers and offered you full immunity, a get-out-of-jail-free card, right?
I don't know if that was immediately.
Pretty soon after you got arrested, you were offered to cooperate against Charlie Adelson and the other Adelsons, and you would get to go home to your kids, right?
Yes, sir.
And your lawyers told you about that offer?
Yes, sir, they did.
You also saw an interview on TV while you were in jail in which one of the prosecutors mentioned this immunity offer, right?
Yes, sir.
You have 2 kids who are your world, right?
Yes, sir.
If you took the state's deal, then you would have been let out of jail immediately, right? That's what your lawyers told you.
If I took their deal? Yes, sir.
But you didn't take the offer.
No, I didn't.
In listening to Katherine's testimony, she said she turned it down because she didn't want to cooperate against Charlie, because in order to do so, she'd have to give up Sigfredo, and that's the father of her kids. With Katherine turning down the very generous offer of immunity, her and Sigfredo's trial began in October of 2019. Attorneys for Katherine argued that she had absolutely no involvement in any of this.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, counsel for the co-defendant. Prosecutorial desperation. That is the only reason why Katherine Magbanua is sitting before you today, charged with a crime that she had absolutely nothing to do with. The prosecution's relentless obsession with arresting the Adelson family has led to this day, this moment, in this courtroom, where an innocent person is being accused of a crime that she did not commit. But one thing is 100% certain, members of the jury. At the end of this case, when you are presented with all of the evidence, not just the little bits and pieces from the state, you will see for yourselves that she is completely innocent.
While attorneys for Sigfredo blamed everything on Luis.
Counsel for the government, counsel for the co-defendant, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. 7 years. 7 years in Florida State Prison. That's what Luis Rivera got in exchange for his participation in a first-degree murder case. And who gave him a 7-year deal offer? The prosecution. So you have to think and you have to ask yourself, what did the prosecution get in return for the deal of the century? What did the prosecution get for giving a defendant with an extremely long criminal history, including a recent federal conviction for racketeering as a Latin king? What did he give? Did he give the information of a mob boss or a drug kingpin, a foreign or domestic terrorist, a hiding school shooter? No. He gave up Sigfredo Garcia. And why does that matter? Why does what he gave up matter? Why does Luis Rivera's information in this case matter? Because as it's clear from the government's opening statement, their focus in this case is on the Adelsons. Donna Adelson, Charlie Adelson, Wendi Adelson. That's who their real targets are. And so what do? They go after the low-hanging fruit. They go to Luis Rivera, who was charged with first-degree murder and subject to the death penalty. And they tell him, we're going to cut you a deal where you only have to serve 7 more years. 7.
Numerous people testified during that first trial, including Wendi Adelson and Luis Rivera himself.
All right, please introduce yourself and spell your name.
My name is Wendi Adelson, Wendiadelson.
How are you employed, Ms. Adelson?
I'm an attorney.
All right, and do you know...
Microphone up just a little bit, if you would, please, ma'am. All right.
I'm an attorney.
All right, how were you employed back in 2014?
I was employed at FSU Law School.
Okay, and were you a member of the Florida Bar at that time?
I was.
All right, and did you know Dan Markel?
Yes, I did.
How did you know Mr. Markel?
He was my husband.
When did you meet him?
We met in 2004.
Okay, and when did you marry?
We married in 2006.
Katie is Sigfredo's wife, as you described her, right?
Yes, sir.
She has his numbers, right?
Yes, sir.
You have his numbers, right?
Yes, sir.
And just for the record, Sigfredo had multiple phones at all times, correct?
Yes, sir.
So let's get to June 4th, okay? Or let's get to June 3rd. Do you remember what time Sigfredo came up to you and told you that he had a job for you in Tallahassee?
It was late night, maybe like about 10, 11 o'clock at night, somewhere around there.
Okay. And what time did you guys hit the road?
Excuse me?
What time did you guys get on the road?
Right away.
After jurors had an opportunity to consider all the testimony and following deliberations, Sigfredo Garcia was convicted of first-degree murder.
As the jury, having found you guilty of murder in the first degree and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, I do adjudicate you guilty of each offense. On count one, I sentence you to life in prison. Give you credit on that sentence of 1,238 days, which dates back to May 25th, 2016, which I understand to be the date of arrest. On count two, I sentence you to 30 years Department of Corrections to run consecutively to count one. There's no jail credit as to count two since it is a consecutive sentence.
Well, are you thinking to yourself what happened to Katherine? After this first trial, jurors were unable to reach a unanimous decision as to Katherine, and a mistrial was declared. A month before Katherine's second trial began, Charlie was arrested on April 21st of 2022. And on May 16th of 2022, Katherine's retrial began. Katherine kind of kept up the same defense, that she had no involvement in this whatsoever. But this time, that defense wouldn't prove fruitful.
In the case of the state of Florida versus Katherine D. Magbanua, case number 2016 CF 3036 and 2018 CF 497, we, the jury, find as follows as to count one. A, the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. We, the jury, find as follows as to count two. A, the defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. We, the jury, find as follows as to count three. A, the defendant is guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder. And it is signed and dated by the foreperson. All right, the state's ready to proceed to sentencing in the state of Florida versus Katherine Magbanua, 2016 CF 3036 and 2018 CF 497. Ms. Magbanua is present here in the courtroom along with her counsel. On count one, which is the count of first-degree murder, you have been found guilty by a jury. You will be adjudicated guilty, and you will be sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for probation or parole. On count two, which is the conspiracy to commit murder, you have been found guilty by a jury. You will be adjudicated guilty, and you will be sentenced to a consecutive sentence of 30 years in the Department of Corrections.
So let's talk about Charlie. Charlie's trial began on October 26th of 2023, which coincidentally was 1 week before his 47th birthday. Numerous people testified at Charlie's trial, including Katherine Magbanua, Luis Rivera, and his sister, Wendi Adelson. There was another person who testified at Charlie's trial, which was his ex-best friend and business partner, and I thought his testimony was kind of comical.
Now, isn't it true that you stole from Charlie?
No, not at all.
It's not true that you took checks that were supposed to be made out to the business and took them for yourself?
That's alleged in a lawsuit that's been dismissed. So,
was that lawsuit dismissed because Charlie Adelson got arrested in this case?
I never hired an attorney because I wasn't worried about it.
When was it dismissed? After his arrest in this case or before?
I found out last week, so I don't know. I don't care.
Do you think it was dismissed after he was arrested in this case?
That's speculation on your part. I have no idea. I didn't think about it. Didn't lose any sleep over it.
Was a lawsuit for hundreds of thousands of dollars?
About $2 million. But I don't have that anyway, so I didn't worry about it.
Before he filed that lawsuit, he demanded that you repay him, right?
I guess, if that's what he says.
Well, did he text you and demand repayment?
Yeah.
He said he was going to start taking what you owed him out of your paychecks. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
And you didn't like that.
No.
So you threatened if he tried to recover any of the stolen money for you, you would go to law enforcement and tell them that that he was involved in Professor Markel's murder.
I don't know if that's what I said verbatim at all.
Well, let's see if I can refresh your memory. What exhibit are we up to? Do you recall saying to Dr. Charlie Adelson, I don't owe you shit. I'll be on the phone with the FBI today. Get your affairs in order before prison, punk. You're going to rot in jail. Do you recall saying that?
If you're reading it, then I did.
You open your mouth and I will open mine. Watch, motherfucker. You're a miserable Jew and you're going to get what you deserve. Do you recall saying that?
If you're reading it, then I said it.
I dare you to threaten me again. I'll be on the phone with the FBI before you blink, you murderer. Do you remember saying that?
Yep.
Get fucked. I'm going to get you in jail. Do you remember saying that?
I guess, if it's in there.
You ever heard of a website on Facebook called True Crimes Blog, True Crimes Case, the Dan Markel case? Let's discuss. You ever heard of that?
Yes.
You're just posting pictures of Charlie on that website this week, right?
I don't know.
You want me to show you them?
What difference does it make? What does that have to do with anything?
May I approach, Your Honor? Does this refresh your recollection of a picture you posted of Charlie on that website just days ago?
Yeah, it's a good picture.
On November 6th of 2023, Charlie was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder.
With the jury having found you guilty of all three counts that you were charged with in your indictment of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and solicitation to commit first-degree murder, I am going to adjudicate you guilty of all three at this time, and you are going to be sentenced as follows. As to count one, the first-degree murder count pursuant to section 782.04 and 775.082 Florida statutes, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of release or parole. As to count two, you are going to be sentenced consecutively to 30 years in the Department of Corrections for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. As to count three, you are going to be sentenced to 30 years in the Department of Corrections consecutively for solicitation to commit first-degree murder.
Whenever the court or the judge sentences a defendant, they will always ask the defendant if they have anything to say prior to being sentenced. As is typical, court did that here, and instead of admitting any culpability, Charlie said he was going to maintain his innocence.
Mr. Adelson, I'm going to give you the opportunity to make a statement if you wish. You do not have to speak. However, this is your opportunity if you choose to do so.
I do.
You may stand.
Stand. I would just like to say that I maintain my innocence.
1 week after Charlie's conviction, Donna Adelson was arrested at Miami International Airport as she was attempting to flee to the country of Vietnam. For those of you who don't know, Vietnam doesn't have an extradition treaty with the US, so she could have fled there and lived her happy life, or at least that was her plan, or so it seemed.
Hi, how are you?
You have her ID? You're under arrest for your cell phone. No, I don't want to give it to you. Why do I have to?
Because my attorney said not to.
Why do I have to give it to you? This is evidence. Evidence. She's under arrest. I have to go with you. I have to go. I have to look at you. You don't have to go with me. Let me help you out. No, I have to stay. Please don't do this. Don't stay. You need to grab the bags. Take the bags. Yeah. And you need to wait outside. Okay.
My husband's almost 80 years old. He can't come with me?
Please, can I help? No, you can't join me there. Oh, don't do this, please.
Please.
Oh,
Someone's got to help him get home. This is terrible. You can't do this. This is insane.
Is that okay with you? Please, here's that with handcuffs on. She's not going anywhere. Please, please. Do you have anything in your pocket?
No, no.
Do you have anything of value in you?
No,
Plus, you have a necklace on. You
can
take it off. I'll take it.
Yeah, take it off. Yeah.
And the earrings.
And the earrings, the rings, take everything.
Although Donna's original trial was set to begin on September 17th of 2024, that was pushed back because Donna's attorney moved to withdraw the first day of jury selection. No new dates have been reset. Okay, so you guys are probably thinking to yourselves, what happened to Donna's husband Harvey and what happened to Wendi Adelson? No arrests of either of them have been made as of yet. Although prosecutors have named them as co-conspirators in this case, neither of them have been formally charged. This is a true travesty. This case did not have to happen. Dan was a brilliant legal mind, and now those two sons are growing up without their father. As I stated earlier, Donna's case is still pending. Her trial date is still pending, and if you guys would like an update on that, I'm more than happy to provide one. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, take care.